When he had finished praying, Jesus left with his disciples and crossed the Kidron Valley. On the other side, there was a garden, and he and his disciples went into it. Now, Judas, who had betrayed him, knew the place because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So Judas came to the garden, guiding a detachment of soldiers and officials from the chief priests and the Pharisees. They were carrying torches, lanterns, and weapons. Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out and asked,
"Who is it you want?"
"Jesus of Nazareth."
"I am he."
And Judas, the traitor, was standing there with them. When Jesus said this, they drew back and fell to the ground. Again, he asked them,
"Who is it you want?"
"Jesus of Nazareth."
"I told you that I am he. If you're looking for me, then let these men go."
This happened so that the words he had spoken would soon be fulfilled. "I have not lost one of those you gave me." Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Then the detachment of soldiers with its commander and the Jewish officials, they arrested Jesus. They bound him and brought him first to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jewish leaders that it would be good if one man died for the people. Simon Peter and another disciple were following Jesus. Because this disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard, but Peter had to wait outside the door. The other disciple, who was known to the high priest, came back, spoke to the servant girl on duty there, and brought Peter in. The servant girl asked Peter,
"Aren't you one of this man's disciples too?"
"I am not."
It was cold, and the servants and officials stood around a fire they had made to keep warm. Peter also was standing there with them, warming himself. Meanwhile, the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. Jesus replied,
"I have openly spoke to the world. I've always taught in synagogues or at temples, where all the Jews come together. I said nothing in secret. Why question me? Ask those who heard me. Surely they'll know what I said."
When Jesus said this, one of the officials nearby slapped him in the face.
Is this how you talk to your high priest?
"If I said something wrong, testify as to what is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why did you strike me?"
Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Meanwhile, Simon Peter was still standing there, warming himself. So others asked him.
Aren't you one of his disciples too?
Peter replied,
"I am not."
One of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, challenged him.
Didn't I see you with him in the garden?
Again Peter denied it, and at that moment a rooster began to crow. When the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor, by now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, they did not enter the palace, because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked,
What charges are you bringing against this man?
If he were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you.
Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law.
But we have no right to execute anyone."
place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die.
Are you the king of the Jews?
Is that your own idea, or did others talk to you about me?
Am I a Jew? Your own people and chief priests hand you over to me. What is it that you have done?
My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders.
You are a king then.
You say that I'm a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify the truth. Everyone on the side of the truth listens to me.
What is truth?
With this, he asked again. He asked out again to the Jews and gathered there and said,
I find no basis for a charge against him, but it is your tradition for me to release one prisoner at the time of the Passover. Do you want me to release the king of the Jews?
They shouted back.
No, not him. Give us Barabbas.
Now Barabbas had taken part in an uprising. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him, saying again and again, saying, "Hail the King of the Jews!" They slapped him in the face. Once more, Pilate came out and said to the Jews gathered there,
Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him.
When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them,
Here is the man.
As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted,
Crucify! Crucify!
You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him.
The Jewish leaders insisted.
We have a law, and according to that law he must die, because he claims to be the Son of God.
When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid, and he went back inside the palace.
Where do you come from?
He asked Jesus, but Jesus gave him no answer.
Do you refuse to speak to me? Don't you realize that I have the power either to free you or to crucify you?
You would have no power over me if it weren't given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin.
From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jewish leaders kept shouting,
If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar.
When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat at a place known as the Stone Pavement, which is in Aramaic and Gabbatha. It was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about noon.
Here is your king.
Take him away! Take him away! Crucify him!
Shall I crucify your king?
We have no king but Caesar.
Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. So the soldiers took charge of Jesus. Carrying his own cross, he went out to the place of skull, which is in Aramaic and is called the Golgotha. There they crucified him and with two others, one on each side and Jesus in the middle. Pilate had a notice prepared and passed him to the cross. It read, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Many of the Jews read the sign for the place where Jesus had been crucified.
Do not write the King of the Jews, but that this man claimed to be the King of the Jews.
What I have written, I have written.
When the soldiers crucified Jesus, they took his clothes, divided them into 4 shares, one for each of them. With the undergarment remaining, this garment was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. They said to one another,
Let's not care. Let's decide by lot who will get it.
This happened that the scripture might be fulfilled that said, They divided my clothes among them and cast lots for my garments. So this is what the soldiers did. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there, and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her,
Woman, here is your son.
and to the disciple,
Here is your mother.
From that time on, this disciple took her into his home. Later, knowing that everything had now been finished so that scripture would be fulfilled, Jesus said,
I am thirsty.
A jar of wine vinegar was there, so they soaked a sponge in it, put the sponge on a stalk of this plant, and lifted it to Jesus' lips. When he had received the drink, Jesus said,
It is finished.
With that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Now it was the day of preparation, and the next day was to be a special Sabbath. Because the Jewish leader did not want the bodies left on the crosses during the Sabbath, they asked Pilate to have the legs broken and the bodies taken down. The soldiers therefore came and broke the legs of the first man who had been crucified with Jesus, then those of the other. But when it came to Jesus, they found that he was already dead. They did not break his legs. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced Jesus' side with a spear, bringing a sudden flow of blood and water. The man who saw it had given testimony, and his testimony is true. He knows that he tells the truth, and he testifies so that you also may believe. These things happened so the scripture would be fulfilled. Not one of his bones will be broken. And as another scripture says, they will look on the one that have been pierced. Later, Joseph of Arimathea asked Pilate for the body of Jesus. Now Joseph was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly because he feared the Jewish leaders, with Pilate's permission, he came and took the body. Aware, he was accompanied by Nicodemus, the man who earlier had visited Jesus at night. Nicodemus brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 75 pounds. Jesus' body, the two of them wrapped it with the spices and strips of lemon. This was in accordance to the Jewish burial customs. At the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden was a new tomb, in which no one had ever been laid. Because it was the Jewish day of preparation, and since the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there.